Jean-Michel Basquiat was a Haitian and Puerto Rican artist born in Brooklyn in 1960. Emerging in the streets of 1970s New York City, a time defined by economic decline, social unrest, and the developing culture of hip hop, Basquiat's work serves as a critique of systemic power structures and a celebration of his identity. His art weaves together themes of race, capitalism, colonialism, and parts of his personal life and experiences. What makes Basquiat's art so compelling is not only the urgency of his messages, but also the layers of meaning embedded in his seemingly chaotic works. His use of text, symbols, graffiti-style strokes, and raw imagery defies traditional art and transforms his canvases into complex pieces of art. Basquiat's unique visual language continues to resonate today. Basquiat began his artistic career as a street artist, tagging walls and trains across New York City under the pseudonym Samo. The graffiti movement of the 1970s was not merely an act of rebellion, it was a proclamation of existence for marginalized communities, a way to reclaim public space in a city that often ignored them. In an era of urban decay and economic inequality, graffiti became a vibrant visual assertion of identity and resistance. For Basquiat, tagging was a way to comment on whatever in the world he was dissatisfied with or whatever was on his mind. New York in the early 1980s was undergoing rapid transformation. The financial crisis of the 1970s gave way to an economic boom, marked by a culture of excess and consumerism. This shift extended into the art world, where wealthy collectors sought to commodify radical and experimental art forms. As was mentioned in lecture, as a young artist, Basquiat grew alongside hip-hop, a cultural movement that was just emerging as a significant force in the city's artistic and social landscape. The themes in Basquiat's art frequently intersected with the cultural messages expressed in hip-hop music. The rejection of authority and the celebration of Black identity that were central to hip-hop were also core to Basquiat's work. In the 1980s, Basquiat went from tagging walls across New York to selling paintings at prestigious galleries. He was gaining a large following and friendships among the art crowd with people such as Andy Warhol and Keith Haring. The first time I encountered one of Basquiat's paintings, I was immediately struck by its visual impact. The composition felt distinct, with a style that was entirely its own. There was something raw and unpolished about the way the elements came together, which made the piece stand out from anything I'd seen before. It felt bold, unapologetic, and definitely unique. My initial reaction was simply, "That looks cool." However, as visually compelling as Basquiat's pieces are, understanding the deeper meanings behind them has always been a challenge for me. His works feel intentionally complex. The layers of overlapping figures, vivid colors, scattered text, and fragmented symbols pull your attention in multiple directions at once. It can feel overwhelming, like there's no singular focal point, and I've often wondered what Basquiat wanted me to see first, or if he even intended for there to be anything he wanted me to see first at all. It seemed deliberately messy. Seeing his art felt like hearing a song. His work felt like a visual representation of music, rhythmic, spontaneous, and open to interpretation. The chaos and energy in his paintings evoke the feeling of a powerful, improvised performance. The concept of rhythm in Basquiat's work reminded me of bamba, the traditional Puerto Rican music and dance form we discussed and saw videos of in class. Bamba, like Basquiat's art, is a highly interactive performance. The dancers and drummers engage in a kind of dialogue, responding to each other in real time, with the dancers' movements guiding the drummers' rhythms. This creates communication between the two, where the music and dance are a direct expression of the dancer's emotions or the broader social context. Similarly, Basquiat's art functions in a dynamic and evolving way. As I've learned more about his art, I've come to realize that this sense of confusion and multiplicity is part of what makes his work so powerful. His paintings aren't meant to provide clear, singular answers. Instead, they invite viewers to grapple with the complexity of the ideas he's exploring. Ideas about race, identity, power, and cultural history. I also think that sometimes Basquiat creates art inspired by elements of his personal life, like his lovers or random thoughts he has. Over time, I've sought out different interpretations and perspectives on his work, and it's been interesting to see how others connect with and analyze his art. Basquiat's art is rich with symbolism, and his use of recurring motifs, including masks, crowns, and skeletal forms, offers layers of meaning. Among the many recurring symbols, masks are particularly significant as they tap into a deep tradition of masking as a form of both critique and reclamation for the oppressed, much like the practices seen in carnival traditions. As we discussed in class, masking allows the oppressed to critique social hierarchies by mimicking and exaggerating the behaviors and appearances of their colonizers. In lecture, we discussed Antonio Rojo's description of Carnival as a travestying mirror, reflecting colonial society while distorting and inverting its roles. For slaves in the Caribbean, dressing as their oppressors during Carnival disrupted social hierarchies, if only temporarily, while also offering a means of resistance through mimicry. This mimicry, often exaggerated to mock the oppressors, created a powerful critique of colonial power structures. In Basquiat's art, masks serve a similar purpose. They act as a form of self-representation that critiques systemic oppression. By painting masks over his figures' faces, Basquiat obscures individual identities and emphasizes collective experiences, particularly those of Black individuals and other marginalized groups. The masks disrupt the viewer's ability to assign a fixed identity to the subject, forcing a deeper consideration of the power dynamics at play. Much like the practice of masking during Carnival, Basquiat's masks suggest an awareness of how identity can be weaponized as a tool of resistance. One example of this symbol of the mask is in Basquiat's Irony of a Black Policeman. In this work, Basquiat presents a figure that seems trapped between two conflicting identities, the individual and the institution. The subject is depicted with a skeletal face, exaggerated features, and mask-like qualities. In this piece, Basquiat is critiquing the internalization of oppressive systems and the complex, often contradictory roles individuals occupy within those systems. The mask can be interpreted as a symbol of the way societal structures enforce conformity and erase individuality. The masked appearance of the Black policeman in Basquiat's work highlights the absurdity and irony of a Black individual serving as an enforcer of a system that historically oppresses Black communities, which highlights the tension between the subject's identity and the role they play within a broader societal framework. The mask in this context could be seen as a metaphor for assimilation and the loss of self within oppressive power structures. To me, it seems as though the distorted features and jagged lines of the face suggest an inner conflict and violence this duality inflicts on the individual. This piece of art stood out to me amongst other pieces Basquiat created because of its relevance today. Despite movements for racial justice, police brutality and systemic racism persist, disproportionately impacting Black individuals. High-profile cases such as the death of George Floyd have highlighted the systemic issues within policing. Basquiat's piece, which criticizes this very dynamic, suggests that the system itself, not just the individuals within it, must be transformed. The work remains a powerful reminder that placing marginalized individuals within oppressive structures does not inherently solve the problem, and representation alone cannot dismantle systemic oppression. Another piece of art that caught my attention was Basquiat's Writing with Death. This was one of his last paintings in 1988 before he died that same year in August. The painting, with its comparative simplicity, feels both like a confession and a realization of his fate. Unlike many of Basquiat's earlier works, which were known for their chaotic layering of imagery, Writing with Death is strikingly minimalist. The skeleton with marks in its mouth looks as if it's bitten into the writer, continuing to chew on him as if it's linked to the writer. This imagery could be interpreted as a direct reference to Basquiat's destructive habits and his understanding of their inevitable consequences. Michael Holman, a close friend, recounts how Basquiat frequently remarked that he would die at the age of 27, echoing the tragic fates of icons like Jimi Hendrix and many others. This self-aware prophecy perhaps shows an acceptance of death. Jean-Michel Basquiat's art is a revolutionary language, a medium through which he critiques systemic oppression, celebrates Black identity, and reclaims cultural narratives. His works are not merely visual experiences, they're acts of resistance, deeply rooted in the social and historical context of his time. Through his chaotic yet deliberate style, Basquiat blurs the boundaries between high art and street art, the personal and the political, the past and the present. Even decades after his death, Basquiat's art continues to resonate, offering profound insights into issues of race, identity, and power. Overall, taking this course has encouraged me to approach Basquiat's art not only from an aesthetic or artistic standpoint, but also from a cultural and historic perspective. It definitely influenced my view that Basquiat's art isn't merely a personal reflection of his life, but also a commentary on the broader societal forces that shaped him. Reading this course's text has helped me learn a lot more about many iconic pieces of art and music and pop culture in general, and think more critically about the meanings behind these pieces. One thing this course taught me was how everything is within the context of everything else. Nothing's created in isolation. For example, Basquiat's art takes on new layers of meaning when examined through the lens of history, and it's inspired me to explore more about not just individual narratives, but the collective stories people contribute to.